Hey, what's going on, everybody? Anthony here from Data Pros. And on this episode of Cloud Talk with the Pros, I'm joined by our very own Microsoft Cloud specialist, Peter Sesniak, to discuss some of the challenges companies and IT admins face when moving to the cloud. Petey, what's good, brother? Thanks for hopping on our premiere episode.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Appreciate making that number one spot.
Hey, you're always in mind, brother. Thank you so much. So, today we're going to be touching on three major points organizations need to think about when moving to the cloud. Point number one is going to be migrating from a premise environment. Point number two is going to be discussing what a hybrid environment is. And number three, last but not least, orchestrating a cloud to cloud migration. So, Pete, the migration guru, you've done hundreds of these. What's the most important steps for a company to take before moving their premise environment to the cloud?
So number one is that pre-migration assessment. We always like to really investigate the on-prem environment, really dive deep into what is actually going on and make sure that nothing's missed, to make sure that we have that successful migration with the minimal disruption to your end users so that they could work as if nothing's changed. Number two, it's always great to have a pilot group. If you could, migrate and use a handful of those end users up in the cloud before you really cut everybody over, it's great because you could test how resources are running. Is there any other issues that you may uncover from that? And then number three is kind of pre-migration and post the communication between training, uh, having the end users know what to expect, what needs to be done prior to the migration and post, and how they're going to be handling various access to applications, servers, email, whatever it might be that you're moving into the cloud.
Got it. So when a company does conduct those three steps and they're ready for their migration, sometimes it can't be a swift from premise to cloud. They have to kind of do this intermediate hybrid environment. Can you explain to everybody that's watching what a hybrid environment is and how some companies might land there?
Yeah, and hybrid environments are essentially when you have, you're working out of two locations, premise and cloud, and it might need to be permanent, but you might be able to move off that hybrid environment after some time, whether it be a legacy application that you're slowly phasing away from, or an on-prem file server that you're just not ready to move everything off of, but you moved your email up to the cloud, and you just gotta work on that and do it at a later time, or even Azure Active Directory. You could manage your local Active Directory, have a synchronization into Office 365, all possible. And that running in a hybrid environment shouldn't deter you from wanting to move into the cloud.
Got and that's so important. I'm glad you hit on that because some people hear hybrid and they're like, that sounds like there's going to be a lot more management. And I'm glad you kind of touched on the fact that it could be a permanent fixture. And a lot of times enterprise organizations do have hybrid environments in place. So I'm glad that you kind of explained that. And now that we touched on premise, we touched on hybrid, let's pivot to a fully cloud managed environment. And specifically, I want to highlight two scenarios that we've seen most often. Number one is migrating away from a third party Microsoft host like GoDaddy. And number two is migrating away from another cloud service like Google. So before I kind of hand over the mic back to you, I did want to give everybody just a little bit of history on the Microsoft GoDaddy piece because we see that often. It puts a lot of small businesses in a pinch. So back in 2014, I think it was, Microsoft and GoDaddy made a deal where GoDaddy could sell their licenses through the hosting service as a little bundle, right? Unfortunately, small businesses at the time weren't able to access the IT admin center for 365 the way they needed to do things like security, Azure, Power BI. So again, that put them in a hard space. A lot of times they kind of came to us saying, "Hey, how do we get out of this?" It's really just a one-to-one migration from GoDaddy to Microsoft. Pete, having done a ton of these migrations, what are some of the obstacles that small businesses face when in GoDaddy, and why have we seen such success moving them to Microsoft 365?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing with GoDaddy is that you are limited. You are not receiving a 100% open Microsoft tenant. You're getting locked out of various admin centers, and those that you are given access to are kind of watered down, limited, with the expectation of you going to GoDaddy for that support. Not only on top of that, you're also not getting all the various applications that may be included with your Office 365 license. Uh, the biggest hurdle being faced is your domain name could only exist in one Microsoft 365 tenant at a time. So you essentially need to delete everything you have in GoDaddy. Luckily, after going through this so many times, we've kind of got the process down from moving from GoDaddy to Microsoft with a very good track record, minimal, no data loss. Uh, but it's definitely a process. You're at the hands of GoDaddy, and unfortunately, there's no way around it until you get away.
Yeah, and like you said, we recommend anyone looking to take full advantage of Microsoft 365, Azure, the Power Platform to either migrate away from GoDaddy before you run into a limitation or start out with a genuine Microsoft 365 tenant. But for on the flip side of the coin, for those migrations that are coming from a third-party solution like a Google, a lot of times that's not a one-to-one exact migration either, right, Pete? And you've seen this, especially with G Suite. What are some of those challenges, G Suite to Microsoft?
Yeah, for the most part, things are relatively smooth, but there's always those certain features that might just not go perfectly. You are going to do different products, so everything doesn't always read exactly the same way. So, perfect example is, categories in Google Suite. They don't really come over into Microsoft 365. Uh, Google Suite uses tags for emails, and that's pretty much handled a little bit differently in the Microsoft world, which would be folders. Google doesn't have folders. Finally, another thing is just the way that contacts are stored and the information, how they're contained into the contact card itself, are handled differently. So, these are all things that actually come with that first step of that pre-migration assessment, and we're able to fish these things and let our customers know what to expect. Is this going to be okay? Or can we figure out a workaround to make something happen uh, to avoid confusion within staff?
No, and that's excellent. It kind of comes full circle to kind of close out our conversation, right? The pre-migration assessment is important no matter what environment you're looking at. If it's premise, if it's cloud, it's super important to understand what your present state looks like and what your future state is going to look like. So, Petey, thank you so much for rounding out our first episode of Cloud Talk with the pros. I hope it's not the last. I hope I didn't scare you off, but thank you so much for joining, and thanks everybody for watching. Until next time, be well. Take care.
Thank you.